Bonjour and welcome to WT France, the weekly podcast in which we explain WTF happened in French politics in the last week. I am your co-host Juliette.
And I am Pepijn. There is a question I ask every single week. And last week you said you were a bit fed up with it. So I don't think I should ask that question again.
Well, we don't have much to talk about though for this week.
Oh, how about a PM? Do you have a PM in France then?
A project manager?
A project manager, yes. Does France already have a new project manager? Maybe senior project manager?
That would be good. Please, if you are a senior project management, send your CV to the Palais de l'Élysée HR service. His name is Emmanuel Macron, and maybe we'll see if we have a PM next week.
I bet it's an Hotmail address.
menu@hotmail.com.
At least it's not menu 454. Okay, so there's no PM. Any hope?
No prime minister, but I think there is hope on the horizon. Like Macron seems to finally be doing his job. It only took like a month and a half.
So it took a month and a half in which there was the Olympics. But what is he up to now?
So what he started is that he's talking with the heads of parties and parliamentary groups. He started the round of consultations yesterday. That's Friday, for those who listen to us on Saturday. He talked to almost everyone on Friday. The only ones missing are the extreme right, and he'll talk to them on Monday. It's not that he's not going to address them at all. I kind of expected a really big showdown because he started with the left coalition, the NFP. But the walkout actually sounded quite satisfied. It seems like the discussion was civil, which is, unexpected, but nice. They said he seems to acknowledge that he lost the election. But on the other hand, I saw someone on Mastodon commenting that the problem with Macron is that because he doesn't have a political spine, he can sort of bend anyway, depending on who he's talking to. So I'm not sure.
That is a little bit of a political stereotype, of course. But maybe it makes sense. I think of him more as not a what's this fish called? Not a blobfish, a pufferfish. He's kind of nice, kind of friendly. But then you clap in front of him and he puffs himself all the way up, especially when there's journalists around. But then when the journalist go away, he just goes back to being a small carp.
And pufferfish, are they vertebrates? Do they have a spine?
Well, that would be a political stereotype. I was just talking about fish.
Oh, yeah. So you think Macron is a pufferfish?
Yeah, but it's not spine related, this thing. Anyway.
So, so he started by talking to the left. They seemed happy. And then he spoke to the centrist and the right-wing leaders. And when they walked out, they also seemed happy. But what they all commented on was that they told Macron that they would immediately censor any government that involves LFI. So that's the La France Insoumise, Mélenchon's party.
The bit that is called extreme left.
It's not the extreme left.
No, but it's called the extreme left.
Well, that's what they keep calling it, but it's not.
No, but that's why I'm just giving context for the listeners. They might have forgotten. They might be on their bicycle riding around and just the extreme left. And no. As Juliette said, they're called the extreme left.
By specific people
by
who are looking for a reason to push them aside. And I think that's a big part of what's happening here. But when they say that thing, we'll censor any government that includes LFI, there's actually two very interesting subtexts here. The first one is that comment does imply that even in the center and the right, there is an assumption that the government could be left-wing. So by saying, we'll censor anything with LFI, it means they're actually not opposed to a left-wing government, or at least they think it would be right to start with that. And the second thing I notice is that what's been the biggest trend all month is it's another attempt to blow up the left-wing coalition.
And how are they trying to do that? The blowing up bit? The metaphorical blowing up bit, I hope?
I hope it's metaphorical. I'm pretty sure it's metaphorical. So this week, they tried a first method, which was to float around new names for prime minister, but specifically people from the Socialist Party. And the socialists are the most centrist part of the left-wing coalition. And there's quite a few in there who really, really do not like LFI in particular. So you'll find that there's this tendency of a lot of people in the Socialist Party who are like, listen, like LFI is dead weight. Can we just ditch them and do something else? One example actually is not from the Socialist Party, but he's also one of the more centrists of the left, is a man called Raphael Glucksmann. And Raphael Glucksmann was the head of the list for the Socialist Party for the European elections. He did actually a very decent score, but almost like the day after he did that decent score, of course, the snap election was called by Macron. Mm-hmm. And so he's never really gotten to bask in the fact that he actually got a pretty good score. But he cannot stand Mélenchon. And one of the things that he did this week, he gave an interview to a magazine called Le Point. And he said, we need to get out of the dichotomy of Macron and Mélenchon. And he's really wanting to be like pushing aside Mélenchon. And to these people, Mélenchon, LFI, same thing. Like they don't make the distinction between the two. And so this is sort of the biggest weakness of the NFP coalition. Not LFI per se, but the extreme dislike between some parts of the Socialist Party and some parts of LFI. And if you press the right buttons, you can blow up this coalition. And then you weaken the left for a very long time. Because what we learned from the snap election is when the left is united, it wins. But the opposite is true. If you blow up the left, you can bury them for like a very long time. So there'll be some floundering, but mostly I think it will create a lot of disappointment in the voters. They went out of their way. They did the right thing. They got the left in parliament as the strongest force. And then the left could still not get their stuff together.
The trick is now that they're trying to stigmatize LFI.
Yeah, on the right wing. And that's why I interrupted you earlier when you were like, oh, you know, the extreme left. Because I know you didn't mean it, but the repetition, the constant repetition of calling LFI extremist, it is landing like softly, bit by bit. And that's what they're trying to do, is to paint LFI as extremist as a reason to push them aside. But the thing is, the left can only win as the sum of these parts. Like, I don't think you could be able to win by pushing aside the Socialist Party either. It works because they made a big tent. And on the right and in the center, they know that, and they're trying to destroy the big tent.
Okay. I noticed in the Dutch news this week, I noticed that 3 of those label LFI as far towards the left. And NOS, I think in one article actually said the extreme left-leaning.
You know, what's weird is, yeah, they do have overall positions that are more on the left. But where I find the main difference between LFI and the other parties isn't so much on the policy positions. It's more on the how do we get there. They can be like quite pushy. They have voted a lot of motions to censor the previous governments. They've really pushed the extreme, and they are not the type of people to compromise. And that's often my main problem with them, is like, if we start by antagonizing everyone, we're not going to get anywhere. But policy-wise, I don't disagree with them on a lot of stuff. Like, I'd say, okay, like, rough estimate, I'd probably agree with them on like 95% of the issues.
I looked at an English translation of their latest policy program, they call it. It's fairly standard.
Yeah.
So I guess that label is a way to make to create identity politics where there really isn't.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, so they don't help themselves by how antagonistic they can be. Like, one of the things they did this week, so last Sunday, they wrote an open letter in which they said that they would try to impeach Macron if he didn't get Lucie Castet as the prime minister. it is not going to work. Like, they cannot possibly impeach Macron right now.
You're making a threat that you're not gonna
like you need
follow up on.
You need a 2/3 majority in the overall parliament. That's the National Assembly and the Senate together to even get the proposal through, let alone get to vote on it.
So what I mean with impeaching is we're gonna make a stand, and then everyone moves on, including us.
And the thing is, when you make that threat, then you weaken yourself, at least in my view. Like, if you make a threat and then you can't follow through, that's worse than not making the threat at all.
So what's the next steps?
So Macron still has to talk to the extreme right, Le Pen and Ciotti in particular. Ciotti, that's the guy who locked himself in the building that someone else had the keys to. He is like your favorite character in this whole vaudeville show.
No. Let me be very clear. This man is not my favorite character.
He's your favorite entertainer.
This man has entertained me quite a lot by being such an idiot, by going inside a building, locking himself in. There was a really nice photo in Le Monde where he stands on the balcony. And it's like, oh, I'm the hero here. And then what you don't see, but what I imagine there is, 3.5 meters lower, there is a guy who just takes his keys out, puts the proper key in the lock, types in the security code, probably 4321, and just walks in the building.
Yeah. Well, he'll be at the Élysée next week. What Macron has said is that he doesn't expect to pick anyone before Tuesday. I think we're nearly there. And the fact that he's saying not before Tuesday does give that sense of like, so they round about next week.
Wednesday.
Like, what could still happen is that everyone says that they'll censor everyone else's governments, and he might try to do a second round. But I feel like we're finally getting somewhere. Like, what he's doing now is what he should have been doing a month and a half ago, which is start exploring, talk to people. And that's what's been frustrating me so much, is not so much that he said, he didn't say the day after the election, like, okay, I'm choosing the prime minister on the left, blah, blah, blah. It's more, why weren't you even talking to people, Emmanuel? Like, come on. That's
first-name basis now.
Yeah, I'm just going to call him up.
So do you think it will be Lucie Castet?
I don't think so. I think she'll refuse to make a government without LFI, because that's one of the four parties that would be bringing her into power. I don't think LFI would say, oh, you know what? Go ahead without us. Like, it's not their style at all. And all the other parties are saying that they would censor immediately a government that has LFI. So that math just doesn't add up.
Okay.
I wonder if she might be like trying to reach out this weekend anyway, trying to convince some people. There is like a micro chance that LFI says we'll support you and we are okay with not being in the government. What matters is to get stuff done. But as I mentioned earlier, they are quite antagonistic. So it's not really
their style.
It really would not be their style. What I think Macron would do next week is that he'll pick a centrist or right-wing politician, and that on Monday, he'll bribe Marine Le Pen and Éric Ciotti with something, like some kind of ministry or high-level position, to not censor that government. And I base that on absolutely no evidence whatsoever. It's just a hunch.
And that's how we roll in this podcast.
Yeah, we don't do like science and proof.
I have a question on this, because we talk about politicians a lot here. So in a practical sense, if the prime minister becomes Lucie Castet, or if the prime minister becomes some middle-aged white racist guy.
It could be a middle-aged white racist woman. Like, that's
of
very
course. In France, that's
discriminatory
actually
of
a thing. Like there's diversity in racist. What does it matter in practice for the average French person? Like a policy decision. Can you give an example of a policy 3 years from now that will be?
I think there's a couple flagship positions that the NFP would be pushing through with Lucie Castet. One of them is to raise the minimum wage. That would have a very big impact on a lot of people. Another one would be to prioritize budget differently. I know they want to focus a lot on healthcare, for instance, and education. And also tax-wise, the left coalition are looking at reinstating the wealth tax that was removed by Macron a few years ago.
And on the other side, do they have clear policies?
Yeah, they do.
Or is it just a no on everything?
So I think there would be quite a focus on reforming healthcare as well, but just in a very different direction than what the left wants to be doing.
Because right now, France has fairly universal government-driven healthcare system.
Yeah, but I think in healthcare, for instance, what you're doing in a country like France is you can change the balance between the public and the private services. So like there is a big private healthcare system as well in France. You could remove public credits and keep the public hospitals as like kind of the background, but not where most of the money is going or most of the priorities are. And then that automatically increases the share of private healthcare.
Okay. So let's park the prime minister question for now. And maybe by next week we know more. Let's hope so. There's the caretaker government as well. What has the caretaker government been up to? Because they're making a budget right now, as I understand.
Yeah, they are. And that feels like more than just caretaking. So one of the issues we discussed last week was they are starting to hit the time in the calendar when the sealing letters had to be given out. And they finally did this week. But as I mentioned last week, for me, making a budget is an extremely political thing. But they know they can't make it a political act. And here's the one weird trick that you can do to make a budget that is political sound non-political, is to just copy-paste last year's budget. And that's what they've done.
I used to do that with papers at university from last year's students.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Did the teachers catch on?
Maybe.
So because people have noticed here as well.
Yeah, one professor did mention it one time that it was very non-original research.
So what they've done is that they have for this year's budget, next year's budget, the exact same figures as for the 2024 budget. But when you include inflation, that means there is actually 10 billion euro less than last year. What's been funny to watch is that decision was made by the current caretaker prime minister, Gabriel Attal. But originally, the minister for the economy, Bruno Le Maire, wanted to reduce the budget overall. And you had this weird thing where they gave, quiet interviews to different journalists and pretended to play good cop, bad cop in the media, where you're like, this is still a political decision, but Gabriel Attal made it sound like he was being the reasonable one, like we can't do too many savings, like people are not okay with that. And I'm like, you still removed 10 billion euro from the budget. That's a lot of money.
And it very much sounds like this was agreed upon in a local WhatsApp group.
I hope they're not on WhatsApp. Like they would have made that decision.
Facebook Messenger.
Yeah, Messenger.
So where are the 10 billion euro coming from?
So right now, some of it is easy. So the Olympics, we're not going to do them again next year. The money that was spent on the Olympics is free, quote unquote. The estimates that I've read about the cost of the Olympics put it anywhere between 3 and 5 billion euro, which is an enormous margin of difference. I guess they just haven't been able to tally everything. The Paralympics are still coming, so it's not exactly clear. But it's still a good chunk of money. For the rest, it's not clear because that's what the process of budgeting is going to be doing. So they've given that kind of ceiling of money, and now the various administrations have to figure out where they're going to be doing some cost saving.
Because they do need to make cost savings, because that's what I think the European Union was very clear about.
So France is one of the countries that has been warned by the EU that the deficit is just too high this year. I think it's at 5% and it's supposed to be 3%. I disagree with a lot of the left here. A lot of the left right now is like, you know what, screw this. We'll do what's right for us, and eventually the budget will be balanced again.
So the left does not want to tackle the budget deficit?
They do. They're just saying it's not the most urgent thing. For me, it's a matter of principle. We've agreed with other countries in the European Union that this is part of how we are doing a shared economic policy. If we don't think that policy is right, let's bring it to the table. Let's agree with others. But this is the pact that we've done together. We can't just say, oh, well, we'll opt out of that bit, because that just weakens the entire European Union when we do that.
Yeah, I think I could probably rant on this. It's about feeling represented. And if you start ignoring the agreements that we have together, you really weaken what it means to, in my case, to feel like being a European citizen.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also opens the door for others to opt out of other measures, saying, well, look at you, you're not holding your end of the bargain either. Now, that being said, I do agree that there should be an increase in the government spending in France. I'm just saying, like, we should make sure that we are also increasing the revenue to match that. And we have some really stupidly rich people in France. Like, we've got an insane amount of billionaires. There's a high level of income inequality. And if these rich people paid their fair share of taxes, we would find the cash to pay for an increase in government spending.
So where do you think they need to spend more money?
There's a few areas that I think need urgent help, and that's been coming through a lot this week, actually. We mentioned healthcare earlier. So right now, there's a lot of hospitals that don't have enough staff to welcome patients, in particular in the emergency rooms. That means that they have a lot of overflow to the point that some of them have closed for patients for some time in the night, for instance.
In the emergency rooms?
In the emergency rooms. But like, where do people go? They have to go then to another hospital. If it's an emergency, you can't just go like, oh, I guess we'll treat that heart attack in 8 hours.
As you know, I went to the emergency room this week.
In Denmark, not in France.
In Denmark. It was 50 minutes away from our house. If that one had been closed, it would have been 2 hours away from our house.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what some people in France also have now.
Yeah, because there's a large part of France that has very low population density. And it's in those places that we tend to close hospitals, public hospitals. And public hospitals are where the emergency rooms are. So I think there's a lot of tension in the public healthcare system. And this week, there was an alert by healthcare unions that there's a total of 50 emergency rooms around the country that have so much tension that they can't service the patients that come through.
And how many are there in total?
Around 650 emergency rooms in the country. I did the math, that's about 7%. So it's not a majority, it's nowhere near the majority, but it's still very, very significant. And then that topples over to non-emergency services because there's longer and longer waiting times. And if you find like a bump in your breast and your doctor says, oh, you need a mammogram, and you wait 3 months for a mammogram, that is horrible. You spend months thinking like, do I have cancer?
That's it, yeah.
It's completely unacceptable.
Maybe to add something, I mentioned I went to the ER earlier this week.
He's fine.
I'm alive. Barely. I'm struggling. I'm perfectly fine.
I think at this point you need to tell people what happened.
It's a fun story now. So we were watching television. We were watching ER, actually, the American TV show ER. And then we noticed there was a very big moth in our room, flying around, going flap, 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 flap. And I said to Juliette, wow, that is a cool moth, flapping around. And then we moved back to ER, where some horrible thing was happening. Because if you're badly funded in Europe, what's the US for your future if you change things? Anyway, half an hour later, I noticed the moth was still there, and also it was very fast. And so I thought it was a swallow.
And then
we noticed that the swallow was Batman-shaped.
Yeah. I was like, I don't think that's a swallow. I think we have a bat in the living room.
And then we moved it to another room. I went in that room, Juliette as well. The bat was just happily flapping around. I
don't think it was happy.
I was a little bit stressed. It was a stressed bat. This is not the cool Batman-type bat that we had. Eventually, it went outside after about 15 minutes, but it most certainly crashed into me at least once or twice.
And at first we thought it was cool, and then we remembered that tetanus and rabies are a thing.
And random other infections. So we called the Danish, what's it called in Denmark?
Lægevagt, their doctor watch.
And they highly recommended to go to the ER. And now I'm healthy again.
I mean, you probably were healthy all along.
Well, I got I got a tetanus injection, and they did some disinfection, and I got another needle in my arm where it was a small wound.
And that's how we found out that in Denmark, apparently bats don't have rabies.
Yeah, that's
so
interesting.
We didn't need the rabies shot.
We probably could have waited till, if I had disinfected it properly myself, waited till 7, 8 in the morning.
Anyway,
where else would you spend money?
One of the areas that needs a lot of government support right now is in our overseas territories. For a few different reasons. In Guadeloupe, so that's in the Caribbean, there is a big drinking water problem. There was a hurricane that passed over the island a few weeks ago and has completely disrupted the water treatment system, and practically no one has drinking water on tap right now. The thing is, this happens a lot in Guadeloupe. They have a chronic problem with drinking water. And what it needs is serious investment in infrastructure. And drinking water doesn't feel like a little luxury that people should have. This is like the basic of government services. You should be able to access clean drinking water. The next one, I would say, Kanaki, New Caledonia. We talked about New Caledonia a few weeks ago.
Yep, protests.
Things are not looking good there. There's been a really big factory that is shutting down in the north part of the island. That's a factory that currently employs 1,600 people. And in the next few months, they're all going to become unemployed. It was a nickel extraction facility, and it just wasn't profitable. But that facility in particular, it was built as part of the Noumea agreement that prevented a lot of the civil unrest in the last 20 years. And so now there needs to be a lot of investment to make up for the economic damage that's about to hit New Caledonia. It's going to be quite expensive, or it's going to be a massive civil unrest that's going to start again.
We'll hear more about that, I suspect.
Yeah. Last overseas territory to mention that's really in tension right now is Mayotte. Mayotte is an island somewhere between Mozambique and Madagascar. And we're back on healthcare. They have massive healthcare issues. There was a cholera epidemic there in May. And they are completely understaffed in doctors. So there's 320,000 people living on the island. And there's a total of 5 emergency doctors. And I think that's also a situation that could go wrong really fast.
And what about in mainland France?
Metropolitan
France.
I would say here there's a lot of need on the green transition. I think that's the case in every country in the world. For France in particular, I would say transport and agriculture needs a lot of support to have a very quick transition. Another one that's lacking is social services. Just this week, a whole lot of people have been laid off in youth support for at-risk youth. They do not have enough people working to support people who are being dropped out of the system. That leads to crime if you don't support these kids. So yeah, there's a lot of areas where I would spend money if I was in charge.
So the week ahead, there will be a new prime minister, most likely. Is there any other big things on the agenda?
Yeah, nice stuff. The Paralympics are starting on Wednesday. We're having hopefully another really fun opening ceremony. I've not heard anything about Smurfs, but hope lives on eternal. What else? Well, everyone is continuing to return from holidays, so we'll have definitely more political developments aside from the new prime minister.
Okay.
That's all for this week then.
Okay. Let's close the podcast.
Vous avez un nouveau message.
Hey everyone, this is recorded after we just finished the podcast. As I was walking away, I looked at the news and saw that Mélenchon just proved me wrong. What he's done is he's challenged all of the center and the right, saying, what if there were no ministers from LFI in the government? Would you then accept Lucie Castet? So he's putting it out there that he seems to be ready to support a left-wing government without LFI in it. It's a very interesting challenge. I did not expect that from him, so my hat off. It should be interesting to see if that goes forward. But I wanted to add this as a postscript because you're going to be very confused if you listen to the podcast and go like, well, he said he would do the thing you said he wouldn't do. And yeah, I was wrong. So I guess we'll talk about this more next week. I really look forward to next week's episode. Bye!